We think of fishermen as being pretty rugged and hardy people. They have to be in order to spend all day, every day out on the ocean or lake, right? Well, for the most part, that's still true. But actually, in a sense, it's a lot easier to be a fisherman today than it was thousands of years ago. That's because we have invented things like boats and nets. Not only did our fishy predecessors not have these handy tools, they also didn't even know what a fish was yet. Hi, it's me, and welcome to this channel. Today, we're going to find out what life was like for the very first fishermen. It is hard to imagine a world without fish and chips, or shrimp tacos, or any of the other many delicious meals that feature fish as the main ingredient. Fish is an easy protein source and a big part of the diet for people who live near water. So it's no wonder that fishing is one of the oldest professions in the world. But humans did not start off with the technology we use now. In fact, the first fishermen didn't even know what a fish was yet. That's right. The animals humans hunted in the water were not fish at all, but shellfish. These guys were known as the first fishermen because they used spears to catch shellfish. This kind of fishing required skill and luck. The shellfish had to be close enough to the surface of the water to be reachable, and the fishermen would need to be quick and accurate with their spears. This style of fishing led to a new invention, though. Since the prey was underwater and couldn't just be speared randomly, the fishermen started to develop diving suits so they could go underwater themselves and get closer to their prey. These early diving suits were made from animal skins and were weighted down with stones. Basically, they were like heavy coats made out of animal pelts. Wearing something like this would make moving around underwater extremely difficult. And that's why early divers wouldn't be trying to do the backstroke or anything. Instead, they would hold their breath and try to spearfish while standing on the bottom of a shallow body of water. With their heavy diving suit on, they would have to sit or kneel on the seabed and wait for a tasty-looking shellfish to come close enough to them for a snack. And when it did, they would quickly reach out with a special long-handled spear and try to impale the shellfish. This form of fishing is still used by some indigenous tribes in South America and Australia, even though these areas are thousands of miles away and have no connection to each other. The fact that both tribes use this method shows how old it must be. It's also pretty safe to say that this method of fishing does not work very well in deeper bodies of water because the pressure would be too great to allow air to be held for very long. And that means that this form of fishing was probably used by people who lived near shallow lagoons, marshes, and rocky coastlines where the prey was abundant. Eventually, people got the bright idea to put a stone at the end of the spear, which made it much easier to pierce the shell of the shellfish. The first known evidence of this type of fishing comes from Japan. The site is called Yui, and it was occupied between 14,500 and 12,500 years ago. The earliest signs of fishing came shortly after the people at the site settled there. Bones found at the site show that humans were eating shellfish such as abalone, sea urchins, and red algae. However, there's no sign that they were catching and eating fish. That wasn't going to happen for another few thousand years. Humans continued to perfect their spears over time, and eventually they were able to catch bigger prey. In some cases, they were even able to hunt seals and sea turtles. Over in Europe, humans were living in caves along the coast and hunting shellfish. Again, no fish yet. Humans hadn't quite figured out how to get past the shells. About 13,000 years before present, the Solitrian culture developed in Spain and France. They developed harpoons with sharp stone points, but they were still used primarily for hunting large mammals. It wasn't until about 9,500 years ago that the Azilian culture developed. They lived in what is now France and northern Spain, and they were the first known European culture to use bone and antler harpoons. This meant that they were able to catch fish. Previously, the only way to get through the shells of shellfish was to use a hard stone tip. A bone or antler tip would break off if it hit a shell, but it could bend if it hit a fish. So this was a huge step forward for fishermen. The Azilians also used a type of net to help with their fishing. They would make small nets by weaving reeds together. These nets were probably cast into the water from the shore, then pulled up again to catch fish. We don't know exactly how they did it since no nets have survived from this period. Across the ocean in North America, the Clovis culture was developing. They lived in what is now the central U.S. and were famous for their distinctive spear points. These spear points were incredibly well made and perfectly suited for hunting large game, but they were still not suited for catching fish. It wasn't until about 8,500 years ago that the Folsom culture developed. They were named after the site where archaeologists found their distinctive spear points. These spear points were smaller than the Clovis points and had a flute or groove running down the center of the point. This design made it so the spear could be rapidly and easily removed from an animal, which is important when you're trying to catch fast-moving prey like a deer or an antelope. But it was also good for fishing. One theory says that the fluted spear points were designed specifically for fishing. Some researchers believe that the grooved spear points were used to catch salmon. There is evidence to support this theory, including the fact that sites where Folsom points have been found are often close to salmon streams. Also, studies done on ancient salmon bones show that they were caught by a spear point very similar to the Folsom point. However, there is another theory that says that the Folsom culture did not purposely invent the fluted spear points for catching fish. Instead, this theory posits that the fluted spear point was invented for catching big game on land. Then later they noticed that the spear point worked well for fishing too. Which came first, fish or fowl? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. For the next few thousand years, the people of North America continued to improve upon the atlatl, a device that helped hurl the spear with more force and accuracy. It basically made the spear a lot more useful. However, the people of North America never developed a boat or a net to help with their fishing. On the other hand, the people in East Asia were doing both. About 7,500 years ago, the Jomon people developed in Japan. They are considered the first true fishermen because they used boats and nets to catch fish. This allowed them to travel farther out to sea and gave them access to fish that were previously out of reach. They created reed boats, which may have looked similar to rafts. They likely weren't very stable and probably weren't used very far from shore. The Jomon people were very successful at using nets to catch fish. In fact, they probably developed most of the netting techniques still used today. The Jomon people lived in a time when the climate was much warmer than it is now. This made fishing much easier since fish were more active in warmer waters and there were more fish to catch. Their fishing practices had little impact on the fish population, meaning that the fish would repopulate quickly and the fishermen could continue to reap the rewards. But the good times didn't last forever. As the ice caps began to grow again, the climate became colder and the fish populations dwindled. This forced the Jomon people to become more nomadic and to expand their territory to include more hospitable areas. Eventually, the Jomon culture disappeared, likely due to a combination of the changing climate and outside influences. So there you have it. Fishing has been an important part of human culture for a very long time, and humans have come a long way since spearing shellfish. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my other content, and thanks for watching.